Welcome to Frisella's All Around the Yard. I am your host, Tony Frisella Jr. here at Frisella Nursery. With us today, we have Scott Sand from Advanced Turf Solutions. Scott, how you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. This is a time of the year that for all you avid yard goers and yard taker carers, I don't know if that's even a term, but you guys are diligently out there, more than likely applying pre-emergent or your first round, or getting ready to if you haven't already. And I thought, what better a time than to have Scott come in and talk to us, talk to you, and shed some light, give a little bit of advice, and give his feedback on some things that you should be looking to do in your yard this time of the year. Because let's face it, we usually don't start thinking about our yards until the summer sun has burnt it to a crisp, and then we say, hey, what can we do now? And it's, you got to wait till next year. And next year is usually now, maybe a few weeks ago, depending on the yard that you have and your situation. But you definitely want to be thinking about this stuff out right now. So we're getting a lot of questions. Getting questions about aeration, overseeding. Can I, put pre-emergent down with overseeding? All these different kinds of questions. So I don't know with what you're seeing out in the market, if there's anything that really stands out for you right now that you want to touch on. Then we kind of go into some of the other points that we have prepped for.
Sure. So right now we are still early. We're not late, so nobody has missed out on timing of putting pre-emerge down. Generally, what we're talking about, most lawns in our area are going to be cool season grass. They're going to be fescue bluegrass. We do have Zoysia Lawns also, but most of the things when we're talking in general, we're going to gear them towards that cool season lawn. If you have Zoysia, sometimes things are a little different. They don't green up until May, mid-May, June, and that's when you start working with those. But assuming everybody, we're talking about a cool season lawn, right now we're talking about crabgrass preventer, pre-emergent herbicide. You're not late on it. You basically, we look for the forsythia bloom around town. If you're not familiar, those are the yellow flowered bushes. You see them will be blooming here as we start seeing temperatures creep into the 60s.
Not the witch hazel. Witch hazel are blooming now also.
Correct. But basically when we start seeing air temperatures regularly up in the 60s, that's when you're starting to get late on your crabgrass preventer. So right now is when you'd want to apply that at the right rate. Be very careful with the spreader and do it per the bag recommendations. But that's the step we're in right now.
So I've seen a lot of people just grab a bag, put in a spreader, and go out. And just for people that might be intimidated by the lever for setting it. Mm-hmm. Is there any pointers that you could give on setting those, or it's just really you just need to take your time and read the directions and go with it?
Yeah, most of the products that you'd buy will have some spreader setting recommendations, but basically, and it will also tell you how many pounds of material you need to apply per 1,000 square feet. That's the terminology they use. So you could do, whether it's a measuring app online or eyeballing it and measuring your property, but you want to, at least in that first 1,000 square foot that you measure out, if you say your front yard is 2,500 square foot, the typical rate, this is going to get a bunch of numbers here, but is usually around 4 pounds per 1,000 square foot. So if you have 2,000 square foot, you should use about 8 pounds of product for your front lawn there. So one way to do it would just be put your 8 pounds, and you can eyeball it. It doesn't have to be exactly to the 8 pounds. If you're a half pound off or a pound off, you're not going to burn your lawn up.
Well, that's where synthetic versus organic really gives you a little bit more fudge room.
Absolutely. With the pre-emergent round, there aren't a whole lot of organic options out there.
Correct.
There are some in the professional markets and things like yourself would use, but to the homeowner, if they're going to go to a box store or anywhere, they're not really readily available. So yeah, eyeballing the rate and watching it to make sure you're going out at the right amount is important. And the other thing that's very important is your pattern, overlapping the proper amount, not doubling up or tripling up, making sure you're making even passes up and down your lawn and spreading the product as evenly as possible.
Gotcha. So with the product going right now, I see looking for crabgrass is what we're looking for right now, or getting ready to start looking for. So we're going to be putting out a preventer. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else, whether with that app or maybe subsequent app after that they need to be thinking about also? So we're going to go now with the crabgrass preventer, and then how many weeks later is it that we're going to be coming in and applying? And are we going to apply another crabgrass preventer, or is it just going to be more straight fertilizer? And then obviously, if we're putting crabgrass preventer down, it might be a question, well, what if we're trying to overseed at the same time?
Okay, so a couple things to unpack there. Start with the last thing you said. No, you cannot do any seeding if you spread crabgrass preventer. It would do the same thing in preventing that crabgrass from coming up as it will on a grass seed. It will basically, as it's a very tiny plant, it will kill that plant. Excuse me. So that if you have an area that is exceptionally bare, you want to go around it with your crabgrass preventer and just skip that, and then you can seed into that area. So if you're going to need to seed your whole property, you cannot use crabgrass preventer. You would have to just come back behind and treat crabgrass as it becomes a problem with a herbicide, a post-emergent herbicide. As far as other things right now, you also said, when would you fertilize next? It's generally about a 6-week interval between when you want to be doing something fertility-wise. We usually wind up with between 5 and 7 applications in a year in our region. What else did we ask for here? Right now, as far as other things you want to be doing, if you haven't sharpened your mower in the last year, you want to do that. Have those blades sharpened.
So why is that important?
That's important because as you cut the grass, you're with the cool season lawns, you're going to be around 4 inches, is about 4 to 4.5 inches mowing height. And a lot of people, especially in the spring, when that grass is really growing vigorously, you really only want to be cutting about 1/3 of a blade off. You want to be keeping it mowed frequently, but a lot of people get behind on that. And when you get behind on that, having sharp blades becomes even that much more important. What'll happen is you're tearing that turf and you're putting stress on that turf. So in the spring, it can take it because it's a powerhouse. It's growing at its best. But we are what I lovingly refer to, we're in the transition zone of growing grass, which means cool season doesn't grow well here all year. In the summer, we all know that lawns struggle. And in the winter, warm season grasses don't grow well here. They go brown and everything. I call our region the armpit of the world for growing grass. So it really is one of the toughest environments anywhere. And so
very Goldilocks.
Yes, and as we get into the tough times of the year, if you don't have sharp mowing blades, you're basically going to open yourself up that much more to your lawn going brown because of fungus or any other number of things, drought and things like that. A crisp, clean cut is just the healthiest way to do it. So it is very important.
So let's dive into that whole concept of St. Louis being one of the toughest areas to grow a cool season grass.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't like the Zoysia, but they like the Zoysia because it's tough, but they don't like it because it's such a short green period. Mm-hmm. And they don't like looking at one of my clients, I can't stand looking at a brown yard all winter long. Mm-hmm. So because it's so tough to grow turf here, there's a lot of recommendations that we give to homeowners, especially for new homes, when they have, they're basically like not having drywall on a wall when you don't have grass down, because you can get behind and do things behind the wall much more cheaply and with less effort than once the drywall goes up. Mm-hmm. So in this case, we're talking about when the sod goes down. And because St. Louis is predominantly clay, unless you're in North County where it's an old prehistoric lake bed, you've got just feet of topsoil if they haven't ruined it developing. More than likely, you're going to, if you don't amend the soil, a lot of times these tractors and trucks have driven over these sites time and time again, especially for these developments that go up where they're 100, 200, 300 homes. You're not going to, it's like laying sod and concrete. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing.
Yep.
So we always recommend to at least till up that existing hard pan, put a couple inches of topsoil compost mix if you can get it, and can invest in it, and put that down because it's going to save you so much time long term. because it's going to help you establish a deeper, thicker root system, which will help fend off the summer stress, and it will help to keep out less weeds. You're not going to get rid of the dandelions and the nutgrass and those kind of things, which I'm sure we're going to jump into here shortly. But for lawns that are established, we talked. There's a note on here a little bit about soil testing, and so how important would you say soil testing is? One, and two, if a homeowner is going to these big box stores, they have some variety of different mixes of the fertilizer, but I mean, a lot of it's kind of one size fits all. And so, I mean, how would a homeowner offset that?
You just hit the nail on the head with the one size fits all issue. So there's two schools of thought here. I have kind of a unique take on soil testing. I do plenty of soil testing. I will review soil tests that people do through the extension agency. They're a nice tool to have, especially if you've had a big issue for years and you can't seem to get your hands wrapped around it, and a professional hasn't been able to get their hands around it. So it gives you some targets and some ideas of what might be causing it. The downside to soil testing, and where there's maybe a little overvalue placed in them, is that many times, with a couple of exceptions of like a lime or maybe a sulfur type scenario, there's not a lot that most homeowners are going to do differently than what a good professional, a good lawn care company can recommend, and do it without that test. So it has some value, and there's some circumstances where I absolutely take them. But sometimes following a very good schedule, the proper steps, and doing them timely and in the right method will handle pretty much everything that soil test would indicate anyway.
So if you're a do-it-yourselfer, soil test probably is not going to be beneficial to you, because it'd be much harder to get to the tools that you need to get to, or the product that you need to get to in order to address some of those situations. And so, correct me if I'm wrong on this. My suggestion would be is when you aerate, to try to even everything out is by applying a compost after you've aerated a yard in the fall, to help build up a soil profile that will help allow the microorganisms in there. And if you can utilize my opinion on this, if you can utilize a organic fertilizer, so you don't kill off all the investment of the aeration and the compost, which is, I think I see that go the wrong way all the time. That will help build your soil base, which is going to help in a natural way balance out pHs and the different deficiencies in the soil. Absolutely.
That was exactly correct. Composting is excellent to do. The problem with composting generally is it's just difficult to do. It's labor intensive. It has its issues. A very good organic fertilizer, and you have to know and find the right ones, but a very good organic fertilizer is by far, in my opinion, it's much easier to do. And they don't fix it overnight, but with multiple applications over a few years, they do wonders, and they absolutely build the soil. Synthetic fertilizers are a necessary thing, and they're important and they're needed. But one thing, all fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, and I'm going to get a little nerdy here, but they're salts. They're built on the backside of a fertilizer has a salt attached to it. Salt indexes are what make soils dehydrate, and they're problematic in some ways. Organic fertilizers have no salts in them. They only benefit the microbes in the soil, and they build soil structure. So over time, they are a net positive all the way. Synthetic fertilizers, like you'll get in any box store and anything like that, you need those nutrients, and they do positive things. They will green your lawn and everything, but there's also a negative effect to the actual soil below. So like I said, that's a little nerdy and whatever.
Well, so you just brought up something that my mind fires on. You just talked about soil structure. And soil class for me in college was horrible, so I'm not going to try to talk at that level. But soil structure is important because you're looking for porosity in the soil. You need the right amount of air, you need the right amount of water to be able to be held in the soil. That's why when I was talking about clay, the compacted soils earlier, there is none of that.
Right.
And so literally it's whatever wherever the roots are, they're fending for themselves. And so when you have when you're reintroducing the organics in these organisms are tunneling and eating and feeding and doing all the other things that living organisms do to build soil. And I'm not going to tangent down, but that's part of the reason why all the farmland's going to pasture with all the corporate cattle farms. We're losing all of our topsoil, and it takes thousands of years to build just a half inch to an inch of topsoil. And you see all these developments. When you see a home development, you can just go ahead and assume that there is no topsoil. That it was all wiped out, or it was scraped off, sold, and again, whatever's being planted there, seen plenty of it. It's rock and clay that you're planting inside, unless you're bringing soil back in.
Yeah, and we do. We have pretty rotten soils in our region. In some parts, if it's not a heavy clay, it's rock. I mean, they're building right on mountains in parts of West County and stuff like that. So the organics, compost, again, I'm not beating it up too bad. It's just labor intensive, but the organics used regularly, you'll be amazed at what you can build a soil into over time.
Well, we've seen great performance with, I believe it's the AMS Gold. So the AMS Gold, the liquid that we spray on, which is one of the best forms. Not to get another nerdy tangent, but vitamin C, your liquids your Lipsalum C is better than your tablet C because your body is going to absorb the liquid much better. It's the same thing with the ground. Yep. Your ground is living. Every time you take a step in the grass, you're walking on living tissue, and so anything liquid is going to be able to absorb in most cases a lot better than any kind of solid where you're waiting for a rain, irrigation, and multiple applications of multiple run cycles of an irrigation or multiple rains for it to take in. What doesn't wash off, because if you get too much rainfall, this is the other thing that we see a lot, especially the last few years. We're getting these crazy spring rains. The just jumps right into the pre-emergents. A lot of pre-emergents are washing out.
Some over time, we get one of the questions you probably get, and I know I do, is especially homeowners that have a lawn service. Their lawn services typically get an earlier start than do homeowners because they may have 500, 1,000, 2,000 properties to hit, so they have to. And there's no problem with that. But one question will inevitably happen is they come out and apply in the morning and we get a big thunderstorm and they will think that material, it would have to be a very hard, very fast rain for the chemistry that's on that stuff to actually wash away. So it does work. You actually want a nice little rain-in event. But I think what you were getting at is over time, if we have a lot of rain events, and now you're talking about the soil being waterlogged and stuff moving down through the soil, that can shorten the lifespan of the chemistry that's designed to last 6-7 months. It can drop it. And where we start seeing that is July, August, and you start seeing a little bit of breakthrough with. So
in some scenarios, the last couple of years, we've had 2 or 3 3 to 5 inch rains within 45 minutes to an hour and a half, and that much rain hitting, and we've had 2 or 3 of them week after week, where not in the whole yard, but where the yard might come down and hit a driveway, and then the water runs along the driveway. Those are the areas that you see the most amount of breakthrough. Yeah, yep. You're always going to see the most problems near concrete, asphalt, if you have a sewer in your lawn, because that's going to heat up the most. You're going to have the most disease near that. You're going to have the most drought damage near that. And yes, you'll get crabgrass. That scenario you described, you'd get some, especially a hillside, you'd get more movement out. But getting a 3 to 5 inch rain over a couple days, or in a short period of time, that isn't so bad as is if we had lots of rain events. If we just had a very rainy spring and early summer, that's when we'd start seeing breakthrough later in the season, more so than one big event. That doesn't generally scare us too much. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So we touched on mowing a little bit, making sure your blades are sharp, and we'll be getting probably going here with the warm temperature we have in the next few weeks. Starting mowing height. You talked about 4 inches, 4.5 inches. Is that where we want to be starting at?
Yep. The grass will be growing like crazy. A lot of people like to mow low, thinking that they won't have to mow as much. And it's a very common thought. They think they're going to stay ahead of it. But if you think about it, that grass is going to grow the same amount each week, whether you're mowing at 3 or 4. And you really want to, 4 inches is a minimum with cool season lawn. Zoysia, you go a little bit lower because it's so thick and it's a different animal. But we're talking the cool season, fescues and bluegrasses. 4 inches is going to be your minimum. You're going to have better color because you're going to have a longer grass plant. There's just more green there. So if you're mowing at 4 and your neighbor is mowing at 3 and you're doing everything else the same, if you stand back and look at those two properties, yours is going to be darker green because there's more physical blade there to be green. And it is a myth that if you go low, you're saving yourself. You're really not saving yourself any. If you're going on a week's interval, you're still going to be mowing the same 1.5 inches off that the other guy is. It's just his is a little lower.
And more than likely, they're going to forget to raise their blade when it starts to get really hot because we're going to go from nice 70s to 90 real fast. And then when they go do that, you're going to start seeing a bunch of brown patches all throughout the yard because it couldn't take the stress of the heat. Absolutely.
So the only time I recommend going below the 4 inches on a cool season lawn is your last mow of the season. You can take it down to 3.5 or 3.25. It technically helps if we don't really get a lot of cool season disease in our region. Of all years, this was the year to maybe get a little bit of, it's called snow mold, but it's not serious. It's not anything anybody needs to be concerned with. But taking your lawn down in the winter, it looks a little better and just is generally okay and advisable. But then as soon as spring comes, you raise it back up and you're good for the season. The other thing I would recommend that people don't think about, people that mow their own lawns, change the direction you mow as much as you can. I do site visits for lots of different lawn care companies, and I'll step foot on the property and they'll wonder why they have little patches or little ruts. And 9 times out of 10, I can find it's going right in the direction of their mower, and it's just their mower wheel where they just ran it every single time. A lot of times it's next to the driveway or next to the street where they start every time. So switch that up a little bit, and it also looks nice to maybe put a little pattern in, a little diagonal or something.
Very prevalent around trees and through gates and those kind of things.
Yep.
So we had recently I saw somebody inquire, I don't know if it's social media or an email, about aeration this time of the year. I always of the school of thought that you aerate your cool season in the fall, you aerate your warm season in the spring. At least that's what I was always told. What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. It's more of a fall project for a cool season, unless you have to, which there is a circumstance I'll get into. But generally, fall is the time for aeration because you're going to seed usually in conjunction with it. And around here, seeding in the spring is a dicey animal. You can do it, and sometimes you get just fine. But if you take your eye off the ball a little bit as you get that seed to come up, it may only have 1 inch, 2 inches of roots, and you know how it is around here. We can turn 90 and dry, and that little seed that you've gone to all the trouble of getting it up and growing will just die. So spring is just not a great time for it. If you wanted to, also there's a little bit of the issue of if you go out and put your pre-emerge down that we've just got done talking about, and then you go poke holes in the ground, you may poke a hole right through that barrier you've created, and you're opening yourself up for weeds. So it's not the ideal time for aeration. That being said, if you have a bare lawn and a real, a lowly rated lawn that you need to get going on, you may not want to wait a whole year to do it. So you would want to have a professional probably come out and give you what to do, but aerating and seeding right now might be the only thing you can do. You also run into, if you're doing it yourself, you can obviously do whatever you'd like. Getting professionals to aerate and seed this time of year can be tricky just because they're not in that mode. So it's not
all put away.
Yes, it basically, they've got so much other things to do between mulching and mowing. And so Yeah, it's not the ideal time, but sometimes it's called for. Zoysia Lawns, spring is when you can do it. Basically, I would say anytime it is green is fine. I would wait until it has woken up, and then it's let her rip. You can really not. You can do Zoysia anytime it is green. You can aerate.
Pretty aggressive stuff. It's not. You're not going to hurt it.
Right.
So this leads to another kind of real touchy subject is irrigation. Especially when we get in the summertime, that's a whole nother animal. We'll touch on it, but I don't want to get too much into the summer and the fall stuff because we'll have other podcasts on that. But we're getting ready to start up irrigation systems. We're getting ready to start mowing, and the grass starts growing. Is there any kind of? It's hard because it is a situational thing. You've got low areas, you got areas on hills, top of hills, shade, sun. So you can't diagnose it over a microphone like this.
Right.
But is there anything that you would suggest, at least to look at or to caution or just to be cognizant of, at least as we start spring off and get closer to summer?
I would definitely say the neatest thing, technology I've gotten or realized and seen out there is these Wi-Fi controllers that you can do everything from your phone now, which are amazing and relatively inexpensive to add even to existing systems.
Exactly.
So I highly recommend those, and the ability to tailor zones to that situation you're talking about. And that is something I don't think people do often enough, and it makes a big difference. If you have big trees, those are going to be thirsty. They're going to suck things down more quickly. If you have shaded areas, they're not. So tailoring it properly is all about it.
Yeah, and in the summertime especially, when we start getting really, really dry scenarios, you'll see where the drip line of your big trees are because you'll see the grass very thin and very brown. Absolutely. In those areas because they're fighting for nutrients, and the grass is going to lose against a 80-year-old tree.
Absolutely. And so those are the exact same things. Tying it back to those organic fertilizers, that's one amazing. If somebody is really a turf nerd like we are, if somebody was wanting to combat that phenomenon and had the ability to tailor, that's one place, organic fertilizers, using them almost in a spoon feed around mature trees and areas like that, and then getting the water it needs, you can combat that very nicely. 99 out of 100 people either don't have the knowledge of how to do that or the time to mess with it. But if you're a real lawn guy and you have the know-how, you're listening to this podcast, you can combat that, and you can keep decent grass under that tree.
And kind of package all that together from things that we've talked about throughout the whole episode so far is if you have a new yard, a new home, and there's no grass on it, again, the drywall's not in the wall, you've got time to do everything between the studs. In this case, you got everything to do with the soil. If you know you've got mature trees, as long as the soil hasn't been too disturbed around it where you know those trees are safe, you can cultivate that hard pan clay. You can get some good topsoil on there. You can set the irrigation. So if you've got a cluster of 2, 3, or 4 or 5 large trees, you don't want to be pulling lines through the roots of all these large trees because one, you're going to shock them and eventually one might die, and then you've got a void, and then it's going to be very tough to get grass to grow over where the root was. But you can tailor the irrigation to target these areas that are going to be fighting for more nutrients, for more water, and versus the areas that are in full sun where it's just a stand of grass. It's like a whole yard of grass. And then applying that Wi-Fi technology because it's also going to let you know, hey, this is watering too much. This didn't run. This did run. This solenoid is going out. And so it's also going to be giving you feedback on what's actually happening with your system if it's set up for that. So it's going to save a whole heck of a lot of heartache and a lot of frustration that comes with some of these systems. So
yep.
Last thing is fungus. As we head closer to the warm season, and this will probably be much more prevalent as we get into summer, but there is some preventative potentially that you would want to do towards the end of spring. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, fungus is what. There's two things that cause lawns in our region, again, staying with the cool season, to kind of brown out and cause big problems. One is going to be the fungus. It's brown patch that usually does the most damage in our area is the name of the disease. It comes on basically around the time that we start feeling uncomfortable ourselves when we get warm and humid. is when that stuff starts appearing and showing itself. It's fungus is in the soil all year long, but during the times when the bookends of the year, the spring and the fall, the turf is so strong that it outcompetes, and there's just no issues. The fungus isn't going to cause any problems. But when we get into that stretch from mid-June till September, the turf is at a disadvantage for a variety of reasons that we talked about in this armpit of the world for growing grass. And the fungus has the advantage, and it can do some damage. A fungicide schedule can get a little bit expensive relative to what we do, but they're available at the box stores. The professionals will do it. Basically monthly, June, July, August, so 3 apps per year, will give you pretty decent control. You don't want to do it too much, and that's where I get a little skittish about them, because it's really truly, I think, something the professionals, a good lawn care provider should be doing. But they are available. There's a lot of different chemistries, and it gets a little overwhelming for the homeowner to walk in, because a lot of guys at a good garden center might be able to give you great advice. But different times of the year, you might want a different one of them, and it's a little complicated. So the professionals know which ones to use, how often they can and should use it, that kind of thing. But generally, it's about 3 applications per year if you're trying to keep premium turf. The other thing that people don't think about often that causes browning out on the lawns, we often think that it's just going brown because it's a tough summer, and that's what it does here in St. Louis or in the metro area, Missouri. But grubs is something that people don't really think about because they're not really there. And until they hit a super big threshold, which doesn't happen terribly often, where they'll wipe your lawn out. But what people don't realize is they are down there in the soil. And what they do as those little grubs that become moths later, they eat the roots. And so as they're eating on the roots, if they're not at that threshold population where it's destroying your lawn, which most times it's not, but they are making the roots weaker. And so what we really wind up seeing is a gradual, very hard to diagnose for the average homeowner, browning out of the turf. Just a less healthy lawn than maybe your neighbor up the road who has done grub control and has kept it in check, and his is staying nice and green with the same amount of inputs otherwise. So that's the other thing to think about, that some people want to skip it because they're like, I don't have a problem with grubs. Well, you don't have a big problem, but it is impacting the color of your lawn and the appearance. So that's usually an application that's done around July, and it would be in a lawn care provider's schedule. But that's another thing that people don't think about in things that cause browning in the lawn.
So with everything, we covered a lot for if we think about for the springtime with the yard, especially for planning, because people live busy lives now, and so they want to do the yard work, but they may not be on as timely. So this one might help them, give them some direction. Is there anything we missed? Anything else that you want to add that we went over? We went over the whole list that we talked about before, and we touched on a few extra subjects throughout the conversation. So I don't know if there's anything you can think of that you want to add.
No, the only thing I can think of is, like I said, it's picking the right product for the right time and finding a good, trustworthy source to get that information. A good lawn care provider. I personally work with a lot of lawn care companies. The value, if you get the right one, is absolutely there, because they're going to select that right product for the right time and steer you the right direction. And by the time of everything involved, there's more value there than people realize. But for the homeowner that's going to do it themselves, I would just say very carefully try to get the advice on what you should be using at the right time, and apply it properly.
So is there a website people can go and maybe check out some of your guys' products?
We do have advancedturf.com, but we're mainly geared towards the professionals. I mean, if somebody calls me up, I will absolutely talk to them and get them going the right direction. But we're mainly in the golf athletic field, and then for the professional lawn care market.
And so I didn't mention this, but that's one of the big reasons why that I wanted to have you on, is because we deal with so many people. Everybody wants a golf course lawn. Everybody. That's what everybody wants and desires. And so you guys being in that market and being held to a high standard, to just have you come on and talk, to the average homeowner about your experience with these different contractors you work with that take care of these fields, and also the golf course superintendents and all that kind of stuff. I think it's the best foundation that people could have moving forward, and I think there's a lot of actionable information that we gave on this.
Absolutely.
So what I want to do is, if you guys have any questions about turf care, obviously Scott is a resource, but you can also reach out to us on any of our social media channels or via our email, help@frisellanursery.com or @frisellanursery or @Frisella Landscape Group on Instagram or Facebook. We love your comments and questions. Not only that, it helps us tailor this podcast to people that have the same questions that just haven't asked them yet. And so it's definitely an opportunity for us to get this information out to those that are looking for it. So please don't hesitate to ask us or reach out to us. And, we are in the prime time for turf applications. If it's something that you feel like you can't handle, we would love to be a resource for you. See what we can offer for you in your yard to help you, again, come home, feel successful with everything that is around your home. So thank you for your ears. We appreciate, everybody that has been interacting with the podcast and our social media content over the past few months. We definitely are starting to change a little bit of our programs up as far as what we're putting out when. We've got a great team behind this. And so if you wouldn't mind also, if you feel you got a lot of good information on it, share and subscribe, and we would greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your ears, and look out for next week's podcast, and talk to you soon.